Admit that it's scary. And being able to be candid about how I feel or how you feel is the first step in being able to get some value out of it. So I would also say you might have to try a few people to find out what you like. You can get recommendations from others, but just because you and I get along really well, someone that you like and feel close to, they might come and see me but not have the same connection at all. So it's all a bit hit and miss. But I'd say just step in and give it a run, and don't be too fussed about whether the therapist's any good or not. But it's about you. So spill your guts, say whatever you want, and see how the therapist reacts. And if you like the way they react, then fine. But if you think that they're not able to handle you for whatever reason, be it because they're too nice or they don't get you or they're a bit formulaic or they're too smart-ass like me, then if it's not comfortable for you, then that's what you need to admit. And like I was saying about the gorgeous therapist, that if that's there, that needs to be said.
You don't think I'm attracted to you?
No.
For you. There you go.
Okay. How does that sound?
That's great. You hate being asked
I do.
how your day is.
Yes.
Why?
I'm a bit disinclined to answer why questions. Can you just accept that I am?
Of course. I guess that's setting the tone for the conversation of the day. I've been very nervous about today, actually.
Have you?
Mm.
Oh, say more.
Well, the script has been flipped. We've never had any difficulty having a conversation.
What do you mean we, Kemosabe?
Sorry?
What do you mean we?
You and I have never had any difficulty having a conversation. However...
it's not true.
In terms of finding words, the flow... We've had difficult conversations.
We've had difficult conversations, yes.
Many different conversations. But the topic has always been me. And today it's not.
Mostly, yes.
Today it's not as much. So before we get too far into this, let me introduce to our viewers, our guest today. Very dear and important person to me, Michael. You are. And
thank you, Jack.
I've had a few chuckles to myself with anticipation of today, that if I get lucky and play my cards right, I might make you feel uncomfortable a few times today.
Yeah, quite likely.
Quite likely.
Yeah.
But, Michael, you are a psychologist, and more specifically have been my psychologist for the best part of over 10 years now, which we recently sort of recapped on, which is quite wild in a way. 10 years.
Well, you used to be very wild. Now you're much more sedate and respectable businessman.
Thank you. But I think a good place to start, actually, I did have a few notes in preparation.
Okay.
And I think it's only natural and is a good place to start to hand it to you to tell everyone a little bit about how you became a psychologist in the first place and your background, because you're quite late to becoming a psychologist.
Indeed, yeah.
And I'm interested to hear that story again.
Well, 1964, I ran away to sea. I escaped the Catholic working class country boring environment, although I didn't know the word boring then, and suddenly found myself travelling around the world wearing this really cool uniform and getting saluted and going to cocktail parties. Oh, this is all right. And after that, I went and lived in Canada for a while and sold cars during the first oil crisis. And it was pretty much then and my drug experiences that had me realise just how limited my understanding and my view of the world was. Mm-hmm. And that's what led me to psychology. It took me quite a while to get there. There's a few other distractions like couple of children and a divorce and all that sort of stuff. But I guess I was in my late 30s, early 40s when I first got my licence, and even then it took me quite some time before I started practising because I was too scared.
I was going to ask, that was my next question, was it hesitation out of fear of the job?
From this perspective, I can see it was, yeah. But at the time, it seemed like, no, I don't want people to become dependent on me, and that's not a good thing. Mm-hmm. From here, I can say I didn't want to be dependent on them, and I was afraid that I might not be good enough.
It is a great responsibility, I suppose, that you hold with your role.
It's a great privilege. Mm-hmm. As you would know, I'm privileged to a lot of your life, and there's a lot of people that are share that sort of stuff with me. So, I guess it's a great responsibility as well, but I guess I'm more inclined to look at it as a privilege, which maybe looks after doing the right thing.
Yeah, well, maybe that's one of the elements that actually made me nervous about today because, at the risk of upsetting some people, in many ways you may know me better than anyone. And back when things...
There's lots of things I know about you. I guess that a lot of people don't, yes.
Yeah, hopefully I don't have to edit any of them out today. But, yeah, I remember when things were a little bit more wild back in the day. I in many ways, felt like I was going to church to make my confessions and be absolved of my sins and be told that it was all okay. And Jack, there is no good or bad or right and wrong.
Other than saying makes it so.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that philosophy of good or bad? I know you've used your Collingwood analogy, and I'm going to confess today that it's never resonated that closely with me. But
the Collingwood analogy?
About whether I like it or whether I don't was...
the good and bad one, though, is that, as I'm fond of saying, Catholics and Protestants have a lot of different ideas about what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. Mm-hmm. And certainly Arabs and Jews similarly have lots of ideas about what's right and wrong, and they don't seem to overlap much. And as an old person, I can tell you that old people have different ideas about what's right and wrong from young people, because I've been both. Mm-hmm. And so whether something's to my liking or not is probably a function of my upbringing, my enculturation, and my experiences. And it's a bit like when I say life is empty and meaningless. People often get a bit cranky about that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that so much of what we live and believe is made up. Days of the week are made up. Mm-hmm. They're handy, but it's still made up. Driving on the left-hand side of the road, yeah. It's a construct, yeah. And so, like if a big bomb drops on here right now and you and I die, there'll be a few people sad for a bit, but basically there'll still be traffic in not Church Street, Chapel Street.
Yep.
And it'll all go along. Like we actually don't matter that much at all. So all the meaning and importance in life is stuff that we make up. And if, like the right and wrong and good and bad, it's stuff that we've picked up along the way, like most people whose parents vote Labor finish up voting Labor, and similarly, people don't change that sort of stuff much. Mm-hmm. And they are quite divisive things. But after a while, you can get to say, well, if I'm making it up, do I still want to believe that? Is that a worthwhile belief for me? So if I get that life's empty and meaningless, there's no right and wrong other than what I make up for myself, then it gives me a lot of freedom to get rid of a lot of ideas, belief, practices that are often unconscious, but no longer of much value. Like it might have been value to throw tantrums when I was 4 years old, but it's not so good at 70,
Yeah, you use the word freedom there, but it's also quite powerful to lean into that perspective that you've just shared in a way, because don't you think that so many people's suffering is because of the importance that they've put their own existence on?
Well, the way to avoid depression and anxiety is to not get involved in your own life. That was supposed to be amusing.
Now, you really, as I said, I've got a few notes here, and you haven't forced me to do anything, but you've you're going to make me jump towards the end
Yes.
where I had some psychedelics and I guess the topic of drugs there.
Yep.
And you mentioned yours early. Can you tell me a bit about those experiences and what it is that you had experimented with and what sort of enlightenment came from those experiences?
Well, I guess like a lot of people in my generation, I did a lot of what we called dope, and I guess your generation calls weed, and also acid, which is the big one, and experiences that I'd had on acid, and although I've probably had better hallucinations on dope, the thing is,
Really?
yeah.
Interesting. Geez, you must have hit it hard.
I think quality was a bit different
No doubt.
60 years ago.
No doubt.
So just making me recognise how much of my beliefs were made up and how narrow my views were. I have one particular image that I remember seeing, a thin green line which went for about 100 metres in either direction right ahead of me. I thought, wow, look at that. And then I moved a little bit and the green line turned out to be the edge of a sheet of glass or a mirror. And so just like, wow, look at that, all the stuff it's reflecting. And it seemed like my life was looking at the green line when there was actually a whole lot of other stuff to see, to reflect. So that was essentially what had me pursue this further. Did a bit of the spiritual trip as well, yoga, meditation. I'm still a meditator. But I suppose it was just a general opening up of everything compared to the very narrow existence of the society I was in, which was immediately after the war, being one of the first baby boomers born in 46. Things were very limited, and everybody was poor, so nobody was poor. There just wasn't the availability of ideas or material goods or opportunities. And a really big deal when I was a teenager, we actually got the phone on. And later on, when my kids were in Canada and I was here, the cost of phone calls and stuff was just prohibitive. Which seems absurd now because right this instant I could pick up my phone and send a video to Canada or around the world or whatever. It's just such a completely different world. And that's a bit like what drug experience was. It opened me up to a completely different world.
No, I can relate to my first DMT experience that sort of shattered my entire belief system of everything that you thought was real, which therefore leaves you questioning everything else.
Yes.
You know,
I remember the first time I went to a psychiatrist sometime after that, wanting to find out about this sort of therapy stuff. I remember coming away thinking, whoa, felt like my foundations had been shifted.
the price of civilization is that we are all neurotic. Oh, that's always stuck with me. How did that come about?
Well, it's a
Statement.
pretty straightforward thing, particularly in psychoanalysis. They talk about neurosis is caused by suppression of sexual and aggressive desires, and being civilised means that I can walk down the street here and not have some young dude like you taking offence to my pink shirt and start bashing me up, or if I'm a woman, I can walk freely down the street without much fear of old men like me jumping on you. So in order to be civilised, we have to suppress those sexual and aggressive desires. And so the price of being civilised, that we're all a little bit neurotic.
Yeah, I
Some
think
of us
that
more than
came
others.
up with obviously some of my violent past and coming to accept that it was okay to perhaps like those experiences. Because it's very
I think
exciting.
it was more like accept that that's part of you.
Yes.
And once you accept it, it's much easier to deal with than it is if you're denying it.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Let's move into, I guess, just the topic of mental health in general.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree that the prevalence...
Probably not, no.
You wouldn't agree? I like when you don't agree. that opens the doors for interesting conversations. But do you agree that the prevalence of mental health issues has been exponentially rising in more recent times?
Well, that's what I'd call a closed question. I have to answer yes or no.
You don't have to.
Well, I suppose I could say maybe. But
From your observations.
But if you invite me to comment on that rather than saying, do I agree with this, yes or no, you get more of what my view is. Whereas if you're asking me a question that I answer yes or no to, a closed question, it's going to have it all the response going to be in your paradigm. You're not actually going to be opening up to more new ideas. Whereas if you say, what have I got to say about it, or what do I think about it, then I'll speak to you from my perspective rather than yours. Yeah.
That's a perfect example of how in many ways you've helped me become a better communicator.
Thank you.
By reframing the way that, not just the way I look at things, but obviously
The way-
approach situations.
The way you express stuff.
Yeah. For sure. So, can you share with me how you feel about the prevalence of mental health or mental health in general in today's society?
Well, it's not just mental health, but there's, being an old person now, I recognise that I reckon there's a lot of stuff, society's going to the dogs and all that sort of stuff. And I think, well, I wonder if my parents thought that.
Society's going to the dogs.
Sorry, dog.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Falling apart.
Right.
Or not progressing not moving in a way that's what I'd call productive, inclusive, ideal. But I'm guessing people thought that in the years shortly before I was born, there was a world war going on, and between the wars there was depression and prohibition, and then there was the war to end all wars at the start of the century. So there's always been a lot of stuff that's disturbing people. Particularly after the First World War, there was all that shell shock stuff, which we now call PTSD. So there's always been a lot of stuff about that, but these days there's a lot more information, data. I'd like to say that data is not information, and information is not understanding, and understanding is not wisdom. So there's a lot of data that people get, and a lot more stuff is reported in terms of personal trauma, shall we say. But to answer your question about mental health, yes, I think part of it's to do with the fact we're so overcrowded. There's twice as many people in Melbourne now as there was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And when you jam people up together, then all sorts of difficulties in terms of getting along with one another happen, and all sorts of issues about identity and who am I and all that sort of stuff becomes important, whereas I don't think identity was anywhere near as important 100 years ago. And a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with, not just with communication, but also with the contraceptive pills, completely changed a lot of the rules about relationship between the sexes that have been in place for thousands of years. They don't apply anymore. There's not, for instance, the fear of pregnancy and disease like there was. So the rules that were set up for that don't apply anymore. And so a lot of those rules are in a bit of a jumble. So it's not easy for people to know where to go and what to do. We might complain about the lack of freedom 100 years ago, but things were pretty straightforward for most people. They knew what they were going to be doing. And if you go back a bit earlier than that, you have, like boys knew that they were probably going to do what their father did, and they probably weren't going to move far away from where they're actually living. And daughters knew that they would probably bear children like their mother did. And so identity wasn't such a big deal. But now that we don't live in a nuclear or extended family so much, all that sort of stuff is, all that solid background that you don't know that's there until it gets pulled away. Quite a change. So people are going to be disturbed and exploring and trying to find out what's going on, and probably trying to live by the rules that they were indoctrinated in, which actually don't apply so well anymore.
Yeah, it makes me think of a book that I know is on your shelf as well, Sapiens.
Oh, yes.
And
yeah.
they discussed how that we used to only kind of exist in groups of about 100,
Mm,
I think it was. And now to what you're, talking about is that we're kind of all put under the same umbrella and expected to agree and get along.
Yeah, operate as easily as we did if we had a lot more space, yeah.
Another thing that you sort of touched on there was PTSD, and whether it be PTSD, whether it be ADD, whether it be obsessive compulsive disorders, any of these things that are labelled. I know that you probably wouldn't describe yourself as
operating in the medical model much, no.
Yeah, no, you're quite unique in the way that you operate, and don't necessarily. Yeah, I'm just interested to hear what you have to say about these labels, because again, every fucking man and his dog's got ADD these days. But and I think I'd put myself in that basket, but I don't think it's an excuse. A lot of successful people have got it.
Exactly, yeah. You might remember that. No, you probably don't remember. But in my opening speech to everyone in the first session, I go through the routine with the registration form, and then have a routine of folding it up and putting it in the drawer and putting the pen in and saying it's all that's to remind you that obsessive and compulsive, not necessarily a disorder, right? Mm-hmm. And similarly, Western medicine's been so successful over the last few hundred years.
Big business.
Well,
am I going to get your license revoked today?
No, I was thinking more that you go to the business, and I think of the miracles that those dudes perform with their knives and their medicine.
There's been good and bad. I'm very grateful for Western medicine.
So there's a tendency to apply that model to just about everything. Find out what's wrong and fix it up, and that actually doesn't work all that well in psychology and in therapy. There's a tendency to do it because it's nice and straightforward and simple, but there's plenty of research and evidence that's been around for a long time, 25 years, saying that the method doesn't matter. What actually matters is how the two people get along. That's the critical element. And the other thing about therapy is that most of the changes occur not as a result of the therapy, but as a result of stuff that happens outside of the therapy, like winning the lottery or getting divorced or your dog dying or anything like that. They're the major events. Without the therapy, though, that sort of stuff's likely to have you finish up in a jumble. But certainly there's no real evidence at all for the idea that if you've got this disease or this condition, that this is the way to fix it up. What fixes it up, although I don't like using that word, what makes the change is the relationship and the conversation between the two people. That's the thing that does the healing, not the method that I think I'm so good at. Quite contrary to Western medicine, where you could have a disease or a bacteria and you can apply this drug and it fixes it. What?
Do you believe?
No.
I reckon you might. That there is a conspiracy by governing bodies to make society weak.
It's not a conspiracy, mate. It's out in the open.
Well, there you go. So the answer was no.
These days, there's a return to a lot of respectability of using psychedelic drugs to assist people in therapy.
It's quite a new inroad to
no, it's not. No, it's not new. Certainly, an awful lot of really good work was done in the 50s and in the 60s. But then,
talking about with McKenna. And are you talking about with McKenna and psilocybin research, or are you just talking specifically in the psychology space?
No, right now I'm speaking specifically about psychology.
Okay, well, please enlighten me.
It'll take a while.
We got time.
In the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of respectable work and worthwhile work done on using acid and psilocybin and other psychoactive drugs.
MDMA?
Yeah. I've seen more recent stuff. I don't know how much that was available in the 50s and 60s. But anyway, once we had the war on drugs, all that got stopped. And so for a long time it's all been not acceptable, not respectable. But I guess there's a lot of people that are now my age and saying, well, I don't care and I can push it for longer. And so there's been a lot more official lifting of official sanctions against all that sort of. But the thing is that with that sort of therapy, you probably only need 2 or 3 sessions. You probably need a lot of preparation and you need to be fed income and all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't take many sessions to produce a comprehensive change in people. Just like I was talking about myself earlier, although that wasn't... well, I suppose it was guided by other trip sitters. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that in terms of a business model, which is what you were just talking about, 2 or 3 doses is not a good business model. Something you have to take every day for the rest of your life. It's a good business model.
For sure. For sure.
So I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just the way that business and that sort of stuff operates. And there is also the thing that people like stuff to be under control. And the further you get up the chain of power, the more difficult it is to keep stuff in control. So in order to get stuff controlled and predictable, you have to become harsher and harsher. And you probably have to become very deceitful as well. So there's those 2 aspects to the conspiracy, if you like.
Well, we saw a lot of that in the last few years. For sure. That kind of put everything under the magnifying glass, I'm sure, for a lot of people. Did you see a lot more struggle through the
no, I didn't.
2020?
No, there wasn't much change in the number of people that I saw. Mind you, I have a bit of a niche market, as you're aware.
What would you call your niche market? Because I'm not fully aware of that, who your clientele are. Like,
well, it's become mostly blokes these days and strong women. And as I said earlier, I certainly follow that idea. It's the conversation that heals, not how clever I think I am. And so in order to have an authentic conversation, I've got to be authentic as well, not just authentically enroll as there, that must be awful for you, but also to do a lot of my own self-disclosure as well. And some people don't actually want that in a therapist. Just going back to the point about the effects of the lockdowns, I've seen a lot more in the last 12 months than I had in the 12 months during or immediately after the lockdown. So a lot of this sort of stuff doesn't actually come in right away. And when I look at leases not being renewed at places in Lygon Street, I think, yeah, well, you probably can still hold out your business until the lease runs out. And then when you have to renew it, you have to say, oh, I just can't do it anymore. And so people get put off and all that sort of stuff.
it's really interesting that you actually say that, because I've had a similar observation in my
your business
space of work as well, in the coaching space specifically, given that, you know, for a long time my why was very driven by female health.
Oh yes,
with eating disorders, with the ex-girlfriend and sister, and you know, I feel by no means responsible for it across an industry, but rather quite proud of. I think there's been a lot of really good work done. I've never seen more women in gyms, women lifting weights, women doing martial arts, women not being afraid of food. I think there's been a lot of really good movement in that space. But since, I guess the conclusion of lockdowns and stuff, the typical conversations that have been randomly booked in with me from consultation have been more male and highlight exactly that, the amount of struggle that has existed on the other side of that, that's sort of caught up with bad habits and so forth. There's just, I've just noticed a lot of a common theme of suffering amongst everyday men.
And it's also tied in with that general thing we were talking about before about identity and changes in social mores. So as a young man these days, it's really difficult to know how to behave. Mm-hmm. And you know, more women go to university and, at the risk of getting on a bit of a bandwagon
Let's
here.
go.
Okay. Most homeless people are men.
For sure.
most junkies are men.
Mm-hmm.
Most prisoners in prisons are men.
This is very Jordan Peterson.
Oh, I guess it would be, yeah. And Warren Farrell before him was saying all this sort of stuff. And victims of violence are mostly men. And there's no one more successful at suicide than men. So I don't accept that we're living in a patriarchally dominated society at all, just on those stats. But also, growing up myself, and as a man generally, like, women are the people that run the show. I know a lot of people talk about their father being the head of the household and that sort of stuff, but as a young man, particularly in the Navy where it's expected to be in charge, it was a bit like having to be a man anyway. You know, you have to be in charge even though you don't actually know what's going on. You still have to be like that. And in the world that I grew up in, the roles for men and women were pretty clear. People these days might say it was oppressive or it was not fair or whatever, but it was clear. These days, young men don't have a clear idea of what they're supposed to do and not supposed to do, because often, here's another one of my favourites, is offence can't be given, it can only be taken. It doesn't matter how much you insult me. If I don't take offence, then there is none. And yet, my story about getting outraged as cyclists go by in their Lycra, I recognise there's a lot of other stuff underneath that's worth exploring. But I think it was also Oprah Winfrey that said that insults only hurt to the degree you believe them.
I was about to say the exact same thing. I remember when you first shared that with me, I found it very powerful because your opinion only matters if I give meaning to it.
Yes,
or power
exactly
to it.
Right,
and
yeah.
I think you're probably more susceptible to the opinions of others when you're not so confident or sure of the opinion of yourself.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like there is a bit of a war on masculinity in society. Quest for
it'd be handy to get. Well, we've certainly got women in a lot of the areas where traditionally they were excluded. But two things. One, if we were fair dinkum about getting more people in aged care, we'd make it a bit easier for men. It's almost all women these days.
In aged care.
Mm-hmm. Or in care, in the helping profession generally, you know. As a bloke, as a psychologist, I'm very much the minority. And I guess that's partly why I see so many men, because not only am I a man, I'm also a bit blokey as well.
I was going to say, there's that's been one of the appeals of our relationship in many ways, is it's the way that I've been raised and the way that I view, I suppose, the differences in sexes and respect. And, you know, we called it locker room talk, yeah? Like growing up in the change room. There's certain things and ways that I don't speak around women. And no matter how much I believe that you're a professional, I know that your subconscious mind has a biased opinion no matter what I say. It's hard to believe that you're not going to have judgment on my confessions.
Well, as a man, I have probably a different type of judgment of your confessions than a woman would. Working as a construction worker.
Never
yes,
felt
you
judged.
have.
No, I haven't.
You've been judged favourably.
I believe you have an opinion and judgment, but I haven't felt it in a
There's
way
not
that's
a negative moral
put shame
judgment,
across it. It's always been.
Well, one of the basics of client-centered therapy is unconditional positive regard, which is a stance that I find fairly easy to take.
Does that ever wrestle with the need to be honest? Because I would describe you as someone who's very honest, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why some people have had difficulty with your style.
I can be pretty candid, yeah.
But again,
well, like if I'm finding somebody boring or irritating, then I recognise that's happening here. They're just doing what they're doing, and I'm responding. And so, given I have a basic belief that everyone has an interesting story to tell, if I'm not finding the story interesting, it probably means that I'm meeting some of my blocks. And so that then becomes worth exploring. but I'm also likely to declare that to the person at the time, and that actually usually
Self-disclosure.
raises stakes. As a construction worker, woman comes on the site, the language changes. And as a man, if I go into a small room to have an intimate conversation with a therapist and it's a gorgeous woman, it's going to be a completely different set of responses than if it had been someone male and ugly like you.
Thank you.
And that's a dynamic that needs to be addressed. Like, if I was in that situation, I would have to say to the woman, look, you're really attractive and this makes it really difficult for me. And if she can't handle that or can't operate with that and utilise that, then she's not a good therapist for me. She might be able to respond in a way that has me put it aside or recognise that I see all women that way or whatever. But that opposite sex dynamic, and I suppose it happens for people that are not straight as well. They see another therapist that they find quite hot. So it's an important dynamic to be aware of.
I think I feel that I got very lucky in terms of finding our relationship because it was the first
time you'd ever seen someone in that domain?
I had a court order when I was 16 to see a psychologist, but that was to keep myself in the good graces of the
law
authorities, but of my own choice to seek out help was with you. And although that,
so do you know what it was that actually had you find me?
I was just
I'd Googled or someone?
Yeah, so I'd moved to Melbourne and I'd started the personal training company and had. I was working out of the Zap Fitness on Victoria Street.
Oh, yes.
The Red Gym.
Yeah.
And so given that that's where I was working and I was living in Hawthorne, you in Pelham Street was only just around the corner, and it was actually my mother that found the ones nearby. But and although that...
You're still a mummy's boy?
I'm still a mummy's boy.
Okay.
I'm still a mummy's boy. I'm a mummy's boy with daddy issues.
Well said.
Yeah. But although at that time in my life I was quite in need of some guidance and of an anxious...
Well, you do suffer from famous father syndrome.
Mm-hmm. But I remember I was experiencing anxiety for the first time. And I was I had a relationship breakup and I was struggling. And there was some... I've shed some tears, but since then, they come out every now and then, but I'm a big advocate for, I guess, the power of having a psychologist and doing therapy, because I think we've spent more time, as we've had a couple of times today, we spend more time laughing than crying in section.
The best medicine, mate.
Tenfold, 100%. But my point that I was making is that I just feel that I got lucky because from having conversations with other people that also engage in therapy, the hardest bit can be finding the right person for. Yeah,
coming right back to what I was saying earlier, is it's a relationship between the two people that does the healing.
Yeah, and I think you've got to give someone a go as well, which can be a frustration because there's got the background, and you can't expect to achieve too much in.
But also, you're coming to confront stuff that you don't know what it is, and so all you know is it's uncomfortable. So, in order to confront something that's unknown and uncomfortable, you probably have to persist a bit to find out whether this is the person that's going to help you through it or not.
Yeah, for sure. Which again is the frustrating process, I think, for the client, why they are trying to build. Oh,
yeah, particularly if you want a nice, straightforward response.
And then you go, okay, you decide 5 sessions in. Well, fuck, I've spent X amount of dollars, and I've gone through this, and now I've got a new person. I've got to go through the same process again.
And in fact, people will come to me sometimes and say, I don't want to have to go through it all again, or they want to give me the whole story again. I say, no, I don't need the whole story. I said. I would say something like, part of my value is being able to give you an external perspective. So if you spend a lot of time getting me on your side, then it sort of diminishes my value in that way a bit. Plus, if you want to tell the story, I can't help but wonder that maybe you're wanting to avoid what's going on right now. Like you might not like me and you're not going to say that, or you're feeling frightened and you're feeling silly. Much easier to tell the story all over again. So there's a whole lot of different things that can interfere with that initial exchange. But as I say in the first session to find out whether you like me or not. You might like me but not want to work with me.
I think that's been one of the appeals, actually, for our relationship, is that for anyone who knows me, probably understands that it's not easy to tell me that I'm wrong. And I might not always be as approachable as what I would like to be. But I found...
Welcome to the human race.
Yeah. I became quite... addicted is not the right word, but I would really enjoy being challenged.
Oh yes, yeah.
By you and pulled up on things, but you do it in a way that just tells me another perspective, which is typically a mirror back on myself that something's about me, not anyone else.
I'm not with you. Say again.
Oh, an example would be through a certain scenario, and I feel bad because they are upset, and you would always say to me, "Who? Who's upset?
Who's upset?
Yeah, me. I'm upset.
Okay,
You know, things like that.
Yeah.
But it's just a rare...
I feel bad. Well, bad's a judgment about the feeling. What's the actual feeling?
Yeah. But I don't know. It's good.
Good place to start.
It's a good place to start. So what advice could you give to somebody who's thinking about getting a therapist, or how to approach, I guess?
Well, if you haven't done it before, admit that it's scary. And being able to be candid about how I feel or how you feel is the first step in being able to get some value out of it. So I would also say you might have to try a few people to find out what you like. You can get recommendations from others, but just because you and I get along really well, someone that you like and feel close to, they might come and see me but not have the same connection at all. So it's all a bit hit and miss. But I'd say just step in and give it a run, and don't be too fussed about whether the therapist's any good or not. But it's about you. So spill your guts, say whatever you want, and see how the therapist reacts. And if you like the way they react, then fine. But if you think that they're not able to handle you for whatever reason, be it because they're too nice, or they don't get you, or they're a bit formulaic, or they're too smart-ass like me, then if it's not comfortable for you, then that's what you need to admit. And like I was saying about the gorgeous therapist, that if that's there, that needs to be said.
You don't think I'm attracted to you?
No.
Sorry, I interrupted. I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, you don't look very sorry.
No, I'm not. What was I just thinking?
I was just talking about just doing it, and being prepared to do lots of self-disclosure and make up your own fairly critical judgment about whether this person's likely to be of use to you. It's an expensive process. You're paying a lot of money, so you're the boss.
And that's exactly where I was going to go. And the frustration that people might find when they've made that investment, and I very deliberately have used the word investment rather than expense there, because it's exactly how I view it. And in many ways, again, you are probably the greatest financial investment that I have made over the last 10 years. I ran some numbers on it in my head and was like, wow.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But by no means do I have any regret about that investment, because you've been behind or across nearly every big decision that I've had to make, and that's a comforting thing to know that when I'm in doubt or there are big changes or I have uncertainty, that I have somebody that I trust that is unbiased and isn't in my day-to-day life, that knows me and my background to see if there is anything that you can catch that I'm not seeing.
Yeah, well, if I do my job well, it's like you talking out loud to yourself, or like two blokes talking and no one else gets to hear it. So it's a matter of me creating the environment where you feel safe enough or relaxed enough to be able to say whatever it is that you need to hear yourself say.
And it's contagious, like I think having been on the other side of the table has made me better at being able to sit without feeling uncomfortable and give people the safety to disclose and share as well, which has been very valuable, obviously, in my line of work.
Similarly, that's what has me do supervision every fortnight as well. I go and to my supervisor and we have that sort of conversation. So one, it gives me a bit of a reminder of what it's like being in the patient's chair. But there's always stuff to explore. So
you're right. Like people say they're bored, right? And as self-indulgent as it sounds, but what is more interesting than yourself and your own subconscious mind, right? They say that we have 60,000 thoughts per day subconsciously, as if you're aware of all of them. But it's
maybe if you're enlightened, yeah.
But it is those subconscious thoughts that are influencing your daily decisions and emotional reactions to situations. Yeah. We were talking before about women actually running the world and being a month away from marriage. I probably agree with that more than I ever have. But that was one of the dot points that I had on the notes to bring up today was, I guess, again, relationships. I'm just interested to hear, without it being attached to any specific individual, some of the common difficulties that come up in conversations about relationships and why they fail. Again, divorce rates are quite high. And where do you think people go wrong in relationships in 2024?
Well, probably because they look for things that are going wrong and try and fix them up, and if they're good problem solvers, then their lives are full of problems. And you've just fallen into that trap asking what goes wrong.
Yeah.
But I can answer that as well for a start, is that I don't care how politically incorrect it is, men and women think differently. And men do not have that drive to go through round after round of IVF and expense and humiliation. The things that drive women are very different from the things that drive men. Men want to provide and protect, and women want to feel safe at that unconscious level. And similarly, if the woman's making more money than the man, then that makes life very difficult if it's not an open topic. If that's a taboo topic, then it'll ruin the relationship, which is an example of what you're probably pointing to, is that the need to recognise that you're very different. And also, I think it's a bit easier for women these days in this regard, but the thing about marriage is that it invites, I was almost going to say force, it invites you to be on the team. And if you're a good rover, then there's no point trying to be the ruckman. And so if the bloke is better at dealing emotionally with the kids, then that's an obvious thing for him to do. And if the woman is better at making the financial decisions, that's a better thing for her to do. And in marriage, because it's a partnership, the idea is that the team has all the skills, and that they need to be allocated according to the team member who's actually got the best skill there. And for a lot of blokes to have to surrender the blokey stuff is very difficult. And often the women have to try and manage around it. But if you think of it as a marriage as more like an amalgam rather than a joining of two roles, you're probably a bit closer to the way that I see it working. It's a very intimate commitment as well, and intimacy is generally pretty scary. And so it's a bit like therapy. You'll come up against stuff that you sort of didn't know was there or didn't want to admit was there. So in answer to the question you actually asked, I'd say be candid and be courageous.
I like your definition of intimacy, the combination of vulnerability and trust.
Yeah. So you might say this is quite an intimate conversation right now.
Yeah, I haven't.
Well, it is for me.
No, it definitely is. I think all of our conversations are quite.
I guess,
intimate.
yeah.
But,
And you've said a lot about me, but I also want to say about you, one of the things that has always been a pleasure and a terror working with you is your strength and your courage and your candour. And as I've said to you at times in session, there's frequently times I feel like I'm at the boundaries of my skill and capability. So it's just a matter of centering myself and responding what's actually happening right now. Sure, you've obviously got a lot of benefit from our relationship, as have I. But it is that strength and courage that you exude that's the foundation for all that. This is where you smile to say thank you and shut up, right?
Thank you. That's funny, actually. That's another lesson. Learning to take compliments. And just saying thank
receiving.
you. Yeah.
Receiving
compliments. And just the power of just being able to say thank you rather than to
Oh, no.
to brush it off.
Yeah. Being able to receive a compliment is an overt act of generosity. It allows the generosity and goodwill of the person paying the compliment to actually occur. If you dismiss it, they feel dismissed and think, oh, how stupid am I? But that is aligned with intimacy, though, because I suspect that the social norm of, what, this rag, is about avoiding the intimacy that can often come from acknowledging that. And a bit like the neurotic safety that we have being civilised. Maybe it's just an extended way of not getting too close to people, but still being able to exchange that sort of information.
Probably even more so with Australian culture between men. Man-to-man relationship.
Well, I think there are a lot of stereotypical European men that are
probably the same. Do you think, we were talking about it before.
What do I think about?
No, it was just when you were talking about the being on the team.
Oh, yes.
In the relationship, in that perhaps the more modern push of equality and everything, throwing out the polarity between the relationship and energetically perhaps then struggling?
Maybe I could say I think there's been a gross overcorrection. And not just in that arena either. It's as a society or as a team or a relationship, the important thing is where are we headed? Rather than what have we done wrong and let's try and fix it up. A bit of that's okay, but the main focus it needs to be on, well, what do you want? And a lot of people have trouble working out what they want, and frequently it's because they don't know how they feel. And if you don't know how you feel, it's hard to know what you want. And if you don't know what you want, it's really hard to know what to do. And particularly as boys, when we're little boys, when we express ourselves emotionally, we get ridiculed. Little girls get reassured. And as I'm saying this, I'm aware that it's a sort of statement that's likely to get a bit of public discourse flack, but there's ample research and a lot of replicated, and once people think about it, they recognise that what usually happens to little boys is that they stand up for yourself, there man, don't cry, all that sort of stuff. Whereas a little girl will get, it's okay darling, mummy's here, we'll look after you, it's safe. And so women get to be trained to be able to express themselves emotionally. Boys have to keep it in, but they are allowed to either get angry or to take action. So often...
But you're not allowed to get angry anymore or take action if that's a violent one. Where,
would you like to say
where perhaps
more
1,000 years ago you would have applauded me for being on the back of a horseback with an axe.
Well, I'm talking about little boys, 4, 5, 6. They don't usually do
Get
horsebacks
on
and axes.
Yeah, true.
So what I wanted to say is that that's what's ingrained is whether it's politically correct or not. What happens is that the boy will get frustrated and angry, and that will be allowed in a way that's not necessary for the girl because she's been reassured. And so as we get older, we lose the ability to be able to be articulate about how we feel. I'm laughing and smiling because I'm about to say something that used to get me in a lot of trouble. Probably still would, depending on who's listening to this. But
anyone listening to this will welcome controversy if they've listened to my bullshit for the last couple of years.
Okay. So in the 90s, there was certainly a push for men to be much more sensitive. And to the point where we got to call them snags, sensitive new age guys. And I was one of them. And, I used to be a feminist. I was more of women's liberation than feminist. Well, maybe I was a feminist, but I'm not a feminist now. I'm a menist now. And so I embraced this idea of being more sensitive and that sort of stuff, particularly with the drug experiences. You get to feel all sorts of different things. And a lot of standard feelings get enhanced. But what I found was that when I was actually expressing myself, I would get ridiculed. And I saw it frequently. Women would actually want guys to express themselves emotionally. But when they did, the actions they took, mostly unwittingly, actually had the guys wither away. So I came to realise that whilst women want men to be able to express themselves emotionally, they do, but not all the time. It's something that they want to know is available rather than not available, rather than frequently practised. Got off onto that sideline there. I forget where I was, but I'm sure you can prompt me. Can you mute this while I cough?
That's fine. Cough. If you don't want to hear it, block your ears. It's a good cough.
Thank you. Notice I took that as a compliment.
Well done.
Thank you. It's another one.
You were triggering my thoughts to perhaps one of the earlier things that we explored together was just on feelings, rather than attaching to them again about being good or bad, and rather accepting that they are just what they are and it's not even necessarily the truth. And you shouldn't be, I guess, guilty for your feelings, because it is.
So how are you feeling right now as I ask you?
About what? My feelings.
What are you feeling? It's a very serious look on your face.
So I have to think about it.
Well, maybe feeling serious and pensive.
I think if I'm being very honest, I'm feeling... What's the word I'm looking for? There's a part of me that's going, okay, we're approaching an hour of conversation. Is there any other things that I would like to discuss? Or am I satisfied with the conversation that we've had today? Is there anything that... So perhaps a bit of...
I'd say pensive and thoughtful. Because all that stuff we've just said is ideas. And it's not actually a feeling. Now I'm feeling a bit embarrassed having said that. Now that I've said that I'm embarrassed, it's gone. I'm feeling like a smart ass now.
Well, that was an easy fix for the man who doesn't like fixing.
You're smiling, so I'm presuming you're amused. But that's the point. Feelings come and go that quickly.
I always smile when we're hanging out and seeing each other.
Consistent with my observation, yeah. Although there's been times when you've been like that full-on stare.
Ready to erupt on the world.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So it's nice to have reached a place in my life where they are far and few, those kinds of days, just where I feel out of control. Where
I'd sell my soul for total... No, it's out of total control.
Or just a victim to those emotions, not in control of the actions that come behind them. I've got a greater sense of stability and stillness in the last few years.
It's probably what made you ready to get married.
Probably so. Well, I've got my Bucks weekend this weekend, so I'll probably need to come see you Tuesday.
I think I'll be busy.
Yeah. No, well, with that being said, I really do appreciate you giving up your time and making your way over to the south side today and to give me the opportunity to, I guess, show you through my pride and my passion, which is Jungle HQ and the gym and my livelihood, and of course get to catch up with you free of charge.
I'll send you an invoice.
No doubt.
Many thanks, Tack. It's been a delight.
Thank you very much. Good man. Hope you enjoyed the episode, guys. If you would like, or you liked the vibe of Michael, you'll be able to find him on streetwisepsychology.com.au.
Yep.
Good memory. And Pelham Street in Carlton. Thank you.
Thank you.